the announcement of the God King. Yeah, what's going on, party people? The place to be. I go by the name of the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn is the borough. What's good? What's popping? Hope everybody's doing well. Happy Bodega Eve to everyone. Um, of course, as always, tell a friend that's him again. Please like, share, and subscribe, and share the link wherever you partake in your social media gatherings. Also, if you would like to support the online ministry, you can hit me on my PayPal, which is pinned on top of the chat. And if you'd like to be a monthly supporter of the BK apologist, you can become a patron where you will get various study aids for your own personal Bible study. All right. And of course, we got to say what's up to the party people in the chat. We got CMB, the ambassador. We got KJ. We got Bodega Lady D New. We got my man JT Parker Sr. in the building. We got Wawo. What's going on? What's going on? Good to see everyone. So let's get into this Bible study entitled John the Baptist Announcement of the God King. Right, we're going to take a deep dive into that part in the gospel where John the Baptist baptizes Jesus and the ramifications thereof, and how much apologetics is actually involved in this story. All right. So with that being said, in ancient Judaism, there is evidence that would-be kings engaged in a three-part pattern of accession before they ascended to the throne. These royal candidates would be anointed by a prophet, prove themselves through a feat, and then finally receive an official coronation. This particular Jewish idea, deeply rooted in the Old Testament narratives and in ancient Near Eastern thought, is evident in the gospel narratives of Christ's life. As the Jewish Messiah, Jesus can be expected to fulfill many of the ideals of the office, and certainly his teaching reflects notions of divine kingship. Evidence of this phenomenon offers insights into Christ's mission as Jewish Messiah by heightening the royal nature of his identity and undertaking. Right? We're talking about King Jesus. The bulk of the gospel is the proclaiming of the kingdom and him being king of this kingdom. Right? And this is from an ancient Israelite pattern of kingly accession in the life of Christ by W. Brian Shelton. So let's get into it. Let's read this actual event. This is in John 1, verses 19 to 23. And this is the testimony of John. When the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" he confessed and did not deny, but confessed, "I am not the Christ." But they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" And he answered, "No." So they said to him, "Who are you?" "We need to give an answer to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness. Make straight the way of the Lord, as the prophet Isaiah said." So he's quoting Isaiah, right? Specifically Isaiah 40. So let's go into that verse that he's quoted so we get some more context of what's going on. Okay. So in chapter 40, verses 1 through 5, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway of our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill will be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So John the Baptist is talking to these experts of the Torah, of the Tanakh. And he said, so when he says a voice cries out in the wilderness, they know exactly what he's referencing. And they understand the context as well, right? So that there is no misunderstanding what John is actually trying to say here. But for us who are so far removed from this event, we might miss some components here. So in the paper entitled The Counsel of Yahweh, Second Isaiah, from the University of Chicago Press Journal, it says the setting is the heavenly council in which Yahweh addresses his heralds. Comfort ye, my people. That such is the dramatic background of the passage is immediately confirmed by the following verses, in which herald voices are heard proclaiming the divine message quite as directed in verses 1 and 2. Their proclamation announces the imminence of Yahweh's appearance in acts of redemption, and more specifically, direct preparations for the construction of a superhighway in which Yahweh will march through a transformed desert at the head of his people. And let me take the sound off my phone. Okay. So there's a cosmic thing happening in Isaiah, right? The council is being told to prepare, right? This imminence, this appearance of Yahweh. That's what's happening in Isaiah 40, that Yahweh is telling the council prepare the way for his appearance. So when John the Baptist, quotes that he's a voice in the wilderness, this is what he's talking about. Okay. And it says here, with the arrival of the Messiah, the Apostle John cast John the Baptist in Isaiah's role. Like the prophet of old, John the Baptist has, quote, stood in the council and answered the call. To a Jew familiar with the Old Testament, the pattern would not be lost. As had been the case at the time of Isaiah, Yahweh's council had met in regard to the fate of an apostate Israel. Isaiah had been sent to a spiritually blind and deaf nation. The calling of John the Baptist tells the reader that Yahweh's divine council is in session again. Only this time, the aim is to launch the kingdom of God with the second Yahweh, now incarnate as its point man. Of course, this is from Michael Heiser, The Unseen Realm, Recovering the Supernatural Worldview of the Bible. So when John the Baptist quotes Isaiah, right, there's a lot of heavy theological underpinnings from this quote, right? He's saying, he's reminding them of Isaiah 4 and how the council has been commissioned to herald the coming of Yahweh on earth, and that all flesh would see him. So when John quotes this, he wants that entire picture to play in the eyes of these elite Torah scholars. Like, this is what's happening here. Okay? So it's deeply rooted in the Old Testament, the coming of Yahweh in the flesh. So by John saying what he's saying, he's getting ready to show the world the incarnate version of Yahweh, which of course is Yeshua. But there's something else that happens, right, in this event. And we'll go to Mark chapter 1. Actually, before I do that, let me say what's up to the people. Anybody? Oh, we got my man, the real American Phil Fox. We got my man, the Black Smurf, in the building. Yes. Good stuff. All right, let's continue. Mark 1, verse 9. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And when he came up out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And the voice came from heaven, "You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased." Right? That's a lot right here that we have to unpack in this small passage. Right? Going back to Heiser's The Unseen Realm, Mark 1:11 has God's voice from heaven pronouncing, "You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased." We tend to think of this declaration as a sentimental one, or perhaps some verbal token of affection. It is far more than that. When God refers to Jesus as his beloved, he is affirming the kingship of Jesus. Okay, I'm going to say that again. When God refers to Jesus as his beloved, He is affirming the kingship of Jesus, his legitimate status as the heir to David's throne. The key term is beloved. Scholars have noticed that the term was used of Solomon, the original heir to David's throne. It's difficult to discern that in English translation, though, since the Hebrew term gets translated as a proper name, Jedediah. Solomon is referred to as Jedediah in 2 Samuel 12:24-25. David consoled Bathsheba, his wife, and he went to her and slept with her. She bore a son, and he called him Solomon. And Yahweh loved him. He sent word by the hand of Nathan the prophet, so he called him Jedediah. Because of Yahweh, notice the wording Jedediah is a name or term that Nathan told David the Lord wanted to assign to Solomon. The name in Hebrew is Yediayu and is related to Dawid or Dawid, the proper name David, which also means beloved. Used of Solomon, the term amounts to a title that marked Solomon as the legitimate heir to the Davidic covenant throne. The same message is telegraphed with respect to Jesus. God's own voice announced, "This is the king, the legitimate heir to David's throne." Right? That's pretty powerful, right? When you get the context behind this, right? So the beloved, the David of Yahweh. This is who Yeshua is. He's king. He is royalty. All right. So we get Isaiah 40, right, which shows us the supernatural ushering in of Yahweh incarnate. Then we have Yahweh himself saying of Yeshua that he is the Jedediah, the beloved, right, which also ushers in his royalty. So we have divinity and we have royalty being announced at the same time with John the Baptist present. Right? Pretty powerful stuff. But there's another aspect of this that a lot of us might not be too keen on. That's when the scripture says that the Spirit, descending on him like a dove. Right? What exactly does that mean? Like, what context are we supposed to understand to get this particular concept? What does it mean that it descended on him like a dove? Well, the use of Homer in both the educational system and later epics suggests that Homer's impact on the first century world was pervasive. This widespread influence makes it reasonable to think that Mark and other early followers of Jesus would have had a basic familiarity with Homeric stories and conventions, whether through formal education or by means by the general cultural milieu of the first century. Therefore, as we undertake a new search for the antecedent of the bird simile in Mark, it should not surprise the modern reader if the simile has a precursor in the Homeric tradition. This is from Descending Spirit and Descending Gods, a Greek interpretation of the Spirit's descent as a dove in Mark 1:10 by Edward P. Dixon. Right? Because you don't really see this motif a lot in the Old Testament. Right? Some scholars try to show it as, when the Spirit was hovering over the waters in Genesis, but it doesn't really stick. It's not very much. It's not a Jewish motif. It really isn't. So what Mr. Nixon here is trying to show is that because of the first century and where we was at that time and place, it was very much a Hellenistic world, right? And if you knew any formal education, the way you learned to write and to read was studying the works of Homer, right? So you have this cultural backdrop even in Jerusalem. Those who are well read in Greek are, it was synonymous with knowing Homer. That was your way of learning and understanding, reading and writing and comprehending Greek, was through these Homeric epics. But even if you wasn't a learned scholar, this was, part of the culture. You heard of Homer, you heard of the stories of Homer, even if you did not study them. It's kind of like how you know certain pop records, but you've never played it in your life, but because it's in every car that passes by, they play it in the supermarket, you just know the record, right? You don't have the record. It's not on your phone. You probably don't even like the record, but because the record is everywhere, you know the record. It's the same thing here. So even if you didn't study these Homeric epics, you know it because of the time and places where you lived. Okay? So, all right. Let me check the chat real quick. Okay, we're good. All right. The baptism of Jesus, at its base, the descendant of a heavenly power from the heavens to earth, and the implantation of that power into an earthly figure, as noted above, Mark's description of a heavenly power's bird-like descent to earth is unparalleled in the biblical corpus, except in the gospel parallels, as noted. However, this is not true of all pre-Markian literature. While the heavenly abode of God was an enduring concept in biblical tradition, Greeks too conceived of the heavens above as the home of the gods. Moreover, they believed that these gods commonly visited the earth below. Homer reflects these common beliefs in his epics through frequent accounts of gods' travels between the two realms. Interestingly, in these scenes in which gods travel to and from earth, Homer often uses bird similes to describe their arrivals and departures. On multiple occasions in the Iliad, Homer uses bird similes to describe the descent of gods from the heavenly realm to earth. In Book 15, an Achaean soldier smites Hector, leaving him badly injured. Zeus responds to this event by sending his son Apollo to aid the Trojan leader. When Apollo makes this descent from Olympus, Homer writes that the god, quote, went down from the hills of Ida like a swift dove slaying falcon. That is the fleetest of winged creatures. All right. 3 books later, Homer uses a simile to depict Achilles' mother, Daptis, as she descends to earth. In this scene, Achilles is mourning the death of his cousin Patroclus, who, while donning Achilles' armor, was killed by Hector. Because this event leaves Achilles without his battle garb, Thetis descends from the heavenly realm in order to bring new armor to the mighty warrior. After she leaves the shop of the god Hephaestus, the famed craftsman of armor for the gods, Homer writes, like a falcon, she leapt down from snow-capped Olympus, bearing the flashing armor of Hephaestus. While Thetis' presence ultimately encourages Achilles to enter the war against the Trojans, for the time being, the Achaean continues to mourn the loss of his cousin. Because of his refusal to eat during his time of mourning, Zeus sends Athena down to provide Achilles with nectar and ambrosia. Upon his command, Athena, quote, like a bird of prey, long-winged and shrill voice, leapt down from heaven through the air. Her presence remains unnoticed by all. She secretly puts nectar into Achilles' breast and returns to Zeus' house undetected. So what was being shown here is that if you are familiar with Homer's epics, every time he talks about a god coming down to earth, it's usually described as a bird, right? A falcon of some sort of bird, right? So every time a god comes to earth, he comes as a bird, right? So this is a familiar motif if you are familiar with the Homeric literature, which you would have been whether you was a scholar or somebody who just lived within the culture of first century Galilee during the Hellenistic period. All right. Homer uses bird similes also to describe departures of gods. In Iliad, Poseidon, disguised as Calceus, comes to the 2 Ajaxes to speak with them regarding the war against the Trojans. When Poseidon finishes his conversation with the 2, Homer recounts that the god took his departure in flight like a swift falcon. In the early stages of the Odyssey, Athena is twice compared to a bird as she ascends to Olympus. In Book 1, Athena comes to Earth and assumes the form of Odysseus' old friend Mentis in order to tell Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, that his father is still alive. When she finishes speaking to him, Homer writes that the goddess departs, quote, flying upward as a bird. All right, so there's a lot of bird motifs going on. Let me see how everybody's doing so far. Everybody's good. Boom, boom. Okay, everybody's good here. All right, cool. Let's keep going. The use of bird imagery in the mythological tradition was not limited to Homer. The motif was adopted by later authors who wrote epics of their own. Virgil's Aeneid is replete with heroes and gods, and like Homer, Virgil likens gods to birds when they descend and ascend to and from Earth. Early in the epic, Apollo tells Aeneas that he is to go to the land of his ancestors. During his voyage, the hero and his crew land at Carthage, where there Venus causes Athena and Dido, the queen of Carthage, to fall in love. Because this love affair jeopardizes the completion of Aeneas' God-ordained mission, Jupiter sends his son Mercury down from the heavens to remind us of his mission. While bird imagery was a common way in Greek mythology to describe the general movement of the gods, the Markan baptism account most clearly parallels the Homeric examples. Like Homer's epics, Mark's gospel uses a bird simile to describe a heavenly entity's descent from the heavens to earth. The connection is strengthened when it's observed that bird similes in Homer's typically occur at the moment of a god's arrival or departure. So remember, Jesus arrives at John the Baptist, after John the Baptist says that he's about to make straight ways for the Lord, right? So in the instances above, bird similes mark the arrivals of Apollo, Thetis, and Athena, and the departures of Poseidon and Athena. Mark 1:10 then parallels Homer not only in his use of a bird simile, but also by using the simile to mark a heavenly arrival on earth. These similarities, in addition to the fact that the Old Testament never used a bird simile to describe a heavenly descent, invite the suggestion that Homeric traditions influenced the formation of the Markan baptism account. So you have the Old Testament ushering in via the divine counsel, making straight ways for the coming of the appearance of Yahweh on earth. But then you also have this Homeric, contextualization of the coming of God via a bird. Anybody who lived in the Hellenistic world who would have read this part in Mark would have quickly understood who Jesus was to be, who he was, his ontology, right? If the dove came down, that means he is divine. There wouldn't be no misunderstandings of that. God's take on the form of humans so that they may keep their divine identity concealed while they walk the earth and converse with mortals. Several examples of this type are also offered above. Poseidon assumes the form of Calchas, while he speaks to the two Ajaxes, and Athena takes the form of Mentis, and later Mentor when she converses with Telemachus. Individuals who recall these instances would have perceived Jesus as having a concealed divine identity. Certain grammatical and narrative clues in the baptismal pericope and other gospel stories would have directed individuals to think of Jesus in these terms. Among the elements pointing to his direction on the Spirit's descent, that Greek word, which I can't pronounce, the proclamation of God in Mark 1:11, and the epiphany at the transfiguration. When Mark 1:10 says the Spirit descends, it is unlikely that the original authors and hearers would have understood it to mean that the Spirit descends to Jesus. Mark's use of this Greek term also suggests that he did not intend the Spirit to descend upon Jesus. Mark employs approximately this particular Greek term 140 times in his gospel, and only twice of these instances can this Greek term indisputably mean upon in the spatial sense. So basically, what they're saying here is that this particular Greek term was understood by the people of that time in a manner that it wasn't that Jesus became God via the dove. It was the dove who was God from heaven, came to earth and incarnated into Jesus. Right? This is how they would have understood this term to suggest. Right? It wasn't Jesus becoming God via this dove coming into him. It was the dove coming from heaven, which was already God, incarnating in human form, God in the flesh, which coincides with what we see in Isaiah 40, right? That all flesh would see Yahweh. So both of these things are working in concert. All right, so let's see what else here. So the Spirit's descent as a dove suggests the presence of a Homeric literary motif in Mark's baptism accounts. Such interpretation by no means intends to suppress the Jewish characteristics of the Markan baptism. The report certainly draws on images from the Old Testament as well. The rendering of the heavens and the echo of Psalm 2, verse 7 would have spoken to those who were well-versed in Jewish literary traditions. The existing Jewish interpretation of the Spirit's descent as a dove, however, are lacking because most exegetes have focused too intently on the dove. Right? So, let's see what else here. So passages from Homer show that the motif draws largely on Greek myth. Given that Greek mythology uses bird similes to signify the arrivals and departures of divine beings on the earth, Mark's simile, along with other mythological renaissance in the gospel, appears to echo the common mythological topos of gods in human form. Such renaissances, oh my gosh, would have expanded the ways in which Jesus' identity could have been communicated and received in the culturally diverse world of the first century. So it's not that, as some of our conscious community friends would try to say, a ripoff of Greek mythology. It was the gospel contextualizing the arrival of the God King Yeshua using Greek mythology. And that's how the first readers of the gospel would have taken it as such, right? So you have this heavy Hebrew component of the Old Testament via Isaiah 40 and Psalm 2 and other verses in the Old Testament, coupled together with the bird motif that you would find in these Homeric epics, right? So the two things that I want you guys to get from this quick study is contextualization, right? We always talk about that. The Bible shows us that the Bible will use its current culture and use that culture and usurp it, right? And turn it on its head to convey biblical truths, right? And that's what's happening here. This dove motif is not saying that God is, Jesus is Zeus or anything like that, but it's using these familiar metaphors and motifs to get a point across that Jesus is not some mere man. He is God incarnate. So whether you was a Pharisee or some regular schmegular blue-collar Hellenized Jew, both of these people would have understood exactly what was happening in this part of the gospel. They would have understood that when Jesus arrived to be baptized by John the Baptist, what was actually happening was the arrival of God in the flesh. Whether you was steep in the Torah or just knew your Homeric epics from just living at that time and place. Right? I got this from Gavilan College. What is contextualized teaching and learning? It says contextualized teaching and learning engages students in active learning while assisting them to make meaning out of the information they are obtaining. Contextualized instruction links the learning of foundational skills with academic or occupational content by focusing teaching and learning squarely on concrete applications in a specific context that is of interest to the students. So by Mark incorporating, and God using this dove motif and having John the Baptist quote Isaiah 40, he's contextualizing and helping the people at that time to understand who Jesus is, that he is king and he is God, right? Why use these type of teachings? It makes learning relevant. It engages and motivates hard to reach students, increases learner confidence and enthusiasm, enhances interest and long-term goals in education, right? The Gospels contextualize for these very reasons. So it's stuck in your head. It used things that you already knew to convey new ideas, right? In downtown Jerusalem, some of us would have known Isaiah 40 really well, and some of us would have known the Homeric epics really well. Whatever side of the coin you was in during the Hellenized period of Israel, you would have understood what Jesus was doing with John the Baptist in those waters, right? A second thing that we get from this is that this is actually helps to refute the heresy of adoptionism, okay? The adoptionism is an early Christian, non-Trinitarian theological doctrine which holds that Jesus was adopted as the Son of God in his baptism, his resurrection, or his ascension. This is from the Encyclopedia of Christian Civilization. Because funny enough, they will use John the Baptist baptizing Jesus as a proof text that somehow at that moment, Jesus became God. But when you understand Isaiah 40, and when you understand the bird simile that's being used via these Homeric epics, this passage is actually saying the exact opposite of adoptionism. Jesus did not become God at the time of his baptism. Jesus arrives via the bird, via Isaiah 40, the straight way, making straight ways a highway into the desert, as both God and King, the Jedediah, right? The beloved of Yahweh. It actually says the complete opposite of how people try to twist the gospel of Mark when it comes to his baptism. It's actually the opposite. And I think it's important for us when we defend the gospel, because there are people, I've heard, not all, but I've heard some Hebrew Israelites use this argument to say that Jesus, achieved divinity at this point, as opposed to always been divinity. But based on Isaiah 40, and based on the cultural context of the bird simile, clearly he came as God already in the flesh, right? So, yes, this is a this is a no heresy zone. This is absolutely true, right? So, but that's what we're trying to say here. It's actually a great apologetic against adoptionism when you understand the context in which that particular paragraph is written in, right? So you have Isaiah 40, the great prophet, being quoted, talking about the ushering in of the king, the God. We have Yahweh himself speaking to Yeshua, saying that he's my Jedediah, my beloved, which is placing royalty on him. And then you have this dove that represents God himself coming down to earth, incarnate as Jesus. There's no adoptionism here. It's clearly God showing up in the flesh. In fact, when we read the Gospels, right, that's why they wanted to stone him, right? You who claim to be a mere man, you claim to be God, right? That's when these Pharisees got together with stones. Like, why are you gonna kill me? Because you think you're God. But they've been saying that from the beginning of the Gospel. John said it. Jesus, God in heaven, said it himself about Yeshua, right? So I just think that's just a powerful understanding of that text, which has a lot of apologetic punch to it. You know what I mean? So Jesus was God, and they would have understood that. It's only now that we have these issues. Well, we're not sure. Well, we're not sure because we don't know the context. But now that we have the context, it's very clear, right? Whether you was a very Hellenistic Jew or you was a very religious Jew, either way, the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist covers that one point, that Jesus is both God and man and king, right? So that's it, guys. That's all I wanted to share. I hope this was encouraging. There's a lot of reading, but I hope you guys could look at it, look at the sources, and be encouraged that, when you get deeper into the text, you don't get more loss, you get more clarity. You get more clarity. Take the time to dig in a little deeper, right? Get the context of the original writer and audience as much as you can, and have that in your head while you read the text, right? That's a great way to properly exegete any passage in the Bible, right? Because I didn't know anything about, Homeric epics. Like, I'm not from that time. But now knowing that, man, that makes that passage that much more clear. It there's an extra emphasis, actually, on Jesus' divinity, as opposed to it making it weird or making it confusing. No, it actually makes it very clear. If I was a Hellenized Jew and I'm reading the Gospel of Mark, and I see dove descending to Jesus, in my mind, it's like, oh, wait a minute, they're saying Jesus is God. Because everything else I've read that says God descends on earth, he always shows up as a bird. So Jesus showed up as a bird. Guess who Jesus is? He's a God, right? Now, of course, as Christians, we know he's God the Son. We understand that through our studies and, but even somebody who wasn't a believer at all during that time, even that person would have figured that Jesus is not just some mere dude. But no, this guy's God. They might think he's a separate deity, but even they would understand he's God, right? So I think it just helps us to defend the gospel when we have that context. You know what I mean? So again, you got Isaiah 40, divine counsel, heralding, right? To make the straight way for the imminent arrival of Yahweh incarnate, where all flesh would see him. You have Yahweh himself calling Yeshua, his Jedediah, his beloved, which is a stamp of royalty, of kingship. And then you have the dove motif that, if you lived in that time, clearly shows that this is God coming from heaven, incarnating in the flesh in the form of Jesus. Right? Powerful passage. It's a small passage, but when you understand all the different contexts, man, a lot was being said in that small paragraph. Right? So I hope that encourages you. I hope that helps you really reinforce the concept of Jesus being the God King. That's who he is. He is the God King of the universe and in our lives. Right? So with that being said, guys, I hope you guys are good. And I'll catch you tomorrow at the bodega, hopefully. Tell a friend to tell a friend. And we out. Peace.